The June wind came early that year, sweeping across the Kansas plains like an invisible tide that refused to rest. It rattled the fences, rolled dust off the wagon roads, and struck against the wooden walls of the small schoolhouse standing just beyond Clearwater Hollow. Inside, chalk dust drifted in the sunlight, and every creak of the floorboards carried the breath of the world outside. June Halston stood at the front of the class. The light from the window fell on her brown skin, her eyes calm and bright. She wore a plain gray-blue linen dress, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows. In her hand, a short piece of chalk moved steadily across the board. The wind slid through the cracks, carrying the smell of dry grass, earth, and the distant murmur of the prairie. "Eyes on the board," she said in a low, warm voice, soft but steady enough to quiet the room. "The wind can wait. Arithmetic cannot." The children bent over their work, wooden pencils trembling in small hands. At the back sat a young man, tall, broad-shouldered, sun-browned. Rowan Beckett, 19, had left school years ago to help his father run the ranch. Now he was back to finish what he'd started. He looked nothing like the rest of the pupils, older, quieter, his eyes deep and distant, like the sky before a storm. The chalk in June's hand suddenly snapped. The sharp crack startled her, and she turned, straight into his gaze. It lasted no more than a heartbeat, but something in those gray eyes made her pulse falter. His stare wasn't bold, nor evasive, just steady, weighted, like it carried meaning. She turned away first, gripping the broken chalk. Outside, the wind pressed against the door. Papers scattered across the floor, and a ripple of laughter rose from the children. June smiled faintly, kneeling to gather the sheets one by one. She was used to the wind, and to staying composed amid things she could not control. Calmness was the only armor she had. When the dismissal bell rang, the children burst out like freed birds, their laughter trailing into the wind. June stayed behind, tidying desks, latching windows. From afar came the steady clop-clop of hooves, the mail wagon passing through town. She paused, listening, until the sound stopped near the general store. By evening, the rumor had already spread. In a town this small, secrets didn't last past sundown. Folks said Miss Halston had received a parcel from Cheyenne, sent by a man named Sterling Bancroft, a stranger. That night, the store was nearly empty when she arrived. The lamps burned low, gold against the wooden shelves. Porter Langford, the storekeeper and town postmaster, greeted her with a knowing smile and pushed a small brown paper box across the counter, tied neatly with twine. "For you, Miss Halston," he said. "All the way from Wyoming." She hesitated, not reaching for it right away. Across the room, a few women pretending to browse calico lifted their eyes, pretending not to stare. Vernon Blackwood, the blacksmith, leaned against a barrel of pickles, frowning. "Thank you, Mr. Langford," June said softly, clutching the box to her chest before walking out. She didn't open it there. Only after returning to her small cottage behind the school did she set it on the table, light the lamp, and untie the string. Inside lay a pair of white lace gloves, thin, delicate, and far too fine for anyone in Clearwater Hollow to afford. Between them was a small card, the handwriting curling in black ink. "To the woman whose gentleness could make even the wind pause at her door. With respect, Sterling Bancroft." June read each word slowly. The handwriting was beautiful, too beautiful almost. Its perfection creating distance. She traced the signature with her fingertip, then set the card down. That night, she sat by the window for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees, to the faint howling of wolves somewhere far off. Inside her rose no joy, only a quiet unease, something curious, cautious, like standing before a door half open, unsure whether to step through. By morning, the school filled again with laughter and scuffling feet. June tried to focus on her lesson, yet every time she lifted the chalk, she felt the same weight of someone watching. When she turned, Rowan's eyes were already there. In that dusty room filled with golden light, silence gathered around them. No words were spoken. But in that stillness, June understood. Some winds don't come from the prairie. They rise from within. And once they do, nothing stays still for long. The letters began arriving regularly. Every week, the mail wagon stopped at the general store, and Porter Langford handed June a white envelope trimmed with gold thread, along with a look that hovered between curiosity and pity. Each letter bore the same signature: Sterling Bancroft, a man who had never set foot in Clearwater Hollow, yet somehow seemed to know her life in uncanny detail. He wrote about the winds that swept across the plains, about teaching as though it were planting faith in barren soil. Sometimes he enclosed small gifts: a leather-bound notebook, a fine ink pen, once even a silk handkerchief light as breath. The words were tender, eloquent, and hauntingly gentle. She read them more than once before folding them neatly away, tucking each into the wooden drawer, as if storing a secret meant only for her. But the more letters came, the deeper the silence grew. Inside June, something unsettled stirred, a quiet struggle between hope and doubt, between what was proper and what was not. Outside, Rowan Beckett stayed after class each day. He spoke little, but his hands were never idle. A squeaky hinge, he fixed it. A loose floorboard, he nailed it tight. A crooked desk, he straightened it with calm precision. Every task he touched, he did with a quiet patience that seemed as solid as the earth itself. More than once, June told him he didn't need to stay. He only smiled a little and said, "My father used to say a man ought to finish what he started. I left school once. I'm just keeping a promise to myself." That smile, plain, unassuming, somehow made the air between them heavier, filled with something neither dared name. One afternoon, rain came hard and sudden. The children had already gone. Only the two of them remained. Gray light seeped through the fogged window, and raindrops drummed against the tin roof like a second heartbeat. June stood at her desk, stacking books. Rowan knelt by a broken chair, hammer in hand. Each strike of the nail made her heart flinch in rhythm. He spoke without looking up. "They're saying you've got a suitor in town." "Rumors travel faster than truth," she said quietly. "And if it were true?" He lifted his head. His eyes were close enough for her to see the rain caught in his lashes. "Then it wouldn't concern one of my students." A pause. Then he smiled. A faint, bittersweet smile. "Maybe not. But sometimes a man just wants to see someone happy, even if he isn't the one beside her." The words cut thin but deep. That night, another letter came, the sweetest yet. "I think of your hands, your calm gaze, and I know I have found a rare peace amid the winds." Signed, as always, Sterling Bancroft. June set it down, her eyes drifting to the window. Outside, Rowan was leading his horse toward the barn, soaked to the skin. For a brief moment, the porch light caught his face, young, sun-browned, honest. So unlike the refined man she imagined from the letters. Something inside her shifted. Part of her still fluttered at Sterling's words, but another part sank, heavy with the sense that something didn't quite fit between the man in ink and the man in rain. The next morning, Rowan arrived early. He placed a small bunch of wildflowers on her desk, purple ones from the roadside, petals slightly bruised, humble but sincere. "For you," he said. "No reason. They just looked like the color of your dress." June froze, her fingers brushing the stems. A voice in her wanted to scold him, yet another part couldn't bring itself to. The warmth lingered. That day, her teaching voice was lower, slower, as if carrying something weighted behind every word. When class ended, Rowan cleaned the room as usual. At the door, he paused and said softly, "You know, if a man truly loves someone, he ought to let her see his face." June turned, but he was already walking away, his figure fading into dust and sunlight. The words stayed, simple, honest, unshakable. And for the first time, June wondered, who was the man behind those letters, really? The first summer rain came without warning. One moment the Kansas sky was gold and open, and the next, dark clouds rolled in, thick and low, curling like smoke above the plains. The wind shifted, carrying the damp scent of soil and wild grass, and within minutes, the rain fell hard, drumming against the old tin roof of the schoolhouse. The children shrieked, half fear, half delight. June rushed to shut the windows, keeping the water from spilling in. The little ones pressed close to the glass, watching streaks of rain slice through the gray light. Their laughter blended with the storm's rhythm, a warm, chaotic music, something rare in her quiet, solitary days of teaching. When the rain showed no sign of stopping, she dismissed class early. The children ran toward town, cloaks soaked and flapping in the wind. Soon, only two remained inside, the teacher and Rowan Beckett, waiting for her to speak first. "You should head home before the road turns to mud," she said. Thunder rolled far off, deep and slow. Rowan shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "I live on a ranch, ma'am. Mud's a daily thing." He moved to help her stack chairs and draw the curtains. Warm mist drifted in through the doorway, bringing with it the earthy scent of rain, chalk dust, and wet wood. They worked in silence. The scrape of chairs, the steady drip from his coat, the quiet between them. It all felt too close, too still. There were small pauses, when he bent to pick up a fallen book, when she stepped aside too late and their shoulders brushed. Each time her breath faltered just a little. The door burst open. Vernon Blackwood, the blacksmith, and the man the whole town knew was courting the schoolteacher, filled the doorway. Rain poured behind him, his coat dripping, one hand clutching a battered bouquet of wildflowers beaten thin by the wind. "Miss Halston," he called over the downpour. "Brought you something. Thought you might—" Before he could finish, his boot slipped on the wet floor. He crashed forward with a heavy thud, flowers scattering like broken feathers. Rowan's laugh slipped out before he could stop it. June covered her mouth, but the laugh caught her too. Bright, unguarded, real. It had been so long since she'd heard herself laugh like that. Rowan bent to help the man up, while Vernon, red-faced and sputtering, muttered, "Slippery floor, that's all. Don't think anything of it." No, June said gently, still smiling. Thank you for the flowers. Vernon nodded awkwardly and left, dragging half the storm out with him, leaving a trail of muddy prints and the faint tang of iron in the air. When the sound of his boots faded, silence settled again. Rowan looked at her then, something different in his eyes, softer, closer. She meant to turn away, but he held out a rough handkerchief. You got caught in the rain, he murmured, almost a whisper. June hesitated. The cloth was coarse, patched at the edges. His hands were scarred, dusted with dirt, but warm. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief, lighter than breath, but it stilled them both. Outside, the rain went on. The oil lamp flickered, throwing a small, trembling glow across their faces, eyes dark and wet, reflecting the storm beyond the glass. She wiped her brow quickly, handed the cloth back, and said quietly, "Thank you, Rowan." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on her. Time stretched. The rain softened to a hum, wind whispering through the cracks in the walls. Light spilled across the table, the curve of his shoulder, the papers drying on the desk. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. You should smile more. When you do, the whole room changes. June turned away, pretending not to hear, but her lips trembled into a faint smile she didn't try to hide. When the storm passed, Rowan put the chairs back in order, checked the windows one last time. At the door, half shadowed by the fading light, he said, "I'll come early tomorrow. Fix the porch before it leaks again." "There's no need," she replied. "I'll do it anyway," he said, gentle but firm, his tone soft as the rain easing outside. The door closed behind him. June stood still, listening to the sound of his boots fading into puddles and distance. That night, when she returned home, a new letter waited on her table, stamped from Cheyenne. Miss Halston, I have waited too long to see you. If the Lord allows, I shall come to Kansas before this month ends. I wish to meet the woman who has quieted the restless heart in me. Signed, as always, Sterling Bancroft. June read it again and again, unease stirring deep inside. Outside, the rain had thinned to a soft drizzle. The wind whispered through the eaves like a faraway voice, tender, but heavy with warning. Something was coming. Something that would change that summer forever. That morning, when June opened the door of her small wooden house, she found Porter Langford, the postmaster, waiting with a small box in his hands. "A parcel from Cheyenne, Miss Halston," he said, a hint of curiosity hiding behind his polite smile. June thanked him, signed the receipt, and stepped back inside. She sat at her table, staring at the brown paper box tied neatly with twine. Her fingers trembled as she loosened the knot. Inside lay a thin gold ring, set with a small stone that caught the light like a drop of dew. Beneath the wrapping rested a letter, written in the elegant hand she knew too well. My dearest June, I have waited too long to call you my wife. Though business keeps me from traveling to Kansas, I wish to proceed with our wedding. I have authorized my father to stand in my place, according to Western custom. Wear this ring if you accept. I will come as soon as all is arranged. Sterling Bancroft. June read the letter over and over, her heart tightening between every line. A proposal without a face. A marriage promised by a man whose hand she had never touched. That whole day, she could not keep her mind on the lesson. The children recited and scribbled on their slates, but her voice sounded far away. as if spoken by someone else. When the bell rang, she didn't move. The late sunlight glimmered on the ring lying on her desk. Rowan Beckett was the last to leave. He stopped, about to say something, but his eyes caught on the ring. A moment of silence passed. She didn't explain. Instead, she closed her hand around it. Rowan's lips pressed thin. "Congratulations," he said quietly, and turned away. Yet in that brief glance, she saw something in his eyes. Not jealousy, but loss. When the door closed, June sat still. The ache inside her was sharper than any word Sterling had ever written. That night, Clearwater Springs buzzed with whispers. At the saloon, at the dress shop, at the church steps, voices carried, "Miss Halston's getting married." To who? "He's rich," they say, "owns cattle up in Wyoming." Or maybe she's being fooled. Those words moved like wind, slipping through every crack, curling under her eaves. The next morning, she went to see Reverend Greeley. He read the letter carefully, then sighed. "Proxy weddings aren't wrong, Miss June, but they are strange. Married life shouldn't begin with the word if." "I just fear I've been foolish," she murmured. "No," he said softly. "You're just lonely." The truth of it followed her home. That afternoon, she tried on the ring. The sun slanted through the window, glinting against her dark skin, making the gold gleam brighter than the lamp flame. She looked at it, then at herself in the mirror. Not joy, not fear, just an emptiness she could not name. Outside, Rowan reined in his horse by the fence. He didn't call out. He only looked. His gaze full of words he would never speak. Wind rose, carrying dust down the road toward the church. Across the prairie, thunder gathered, and in small, quiet Clearwater Springs, the town was about to witness a wedding no one could understand. That Saturday afternoon, the air over Clearwater Springs was thick with heat and the scent of scorched grass. The church bell tolled, long and solemn, echoing across the prairie. The whole town came out, not because they believed in love, but because they loved something to talk about. They crowded into the little white chapel, dressed in their Sunday best, eyes bright with the kind of excitement people reserve for scandal. To them, this was not a wedding. It was theater. June Halston entered quietly, her pale blue dress trembling against her knees, her hands unsteady but her back straight. She wore lace gloves and a silver hairpin, every piece a gift from the man she was about to marry. She did not look at the crowd. Her eyes stayed fixed on the cross, where Reverend Greeley stood with his Bible open. "The bride is here," he said gravely. "We await the representative of the groom." The doors opened. A broad-shouldered man with graying hair stepped forward and bowed slightly. His voice was steady, carrying through the hush. "I am Thomas Beckett, the groom's father." The words struck the room like a whip crack. A wave of whispers rolled through the pews. Everyone knew the Beckett name, the ranching family south of town, where young Rowan Beckett often worked the land. June blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "The father of who?" Mr. Beckett looked around, the weight of confession drawing his shoulders down. "Miss Halston," he said softly. "The man who sent you those letters, the one who signed as Sterling Bancroft, is my son." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, the scattered laughter. The boy from her class? The teacher and her student? Lord have mercy. Never seen shame like this. June stood motionless. The noise around her faded until she could hear only the pounding of her own heart. She looked down at the gold ring on her finger. The lamplight struck it cold. Slowly, she pulled it off. It slipped from her hand, hit the wooden floor with a soft, piercing sound. Reverend Grayley closed his Bible. "Miss Halston," he said gently, "do you wish to halt the ceremony?" She said nothing. She turned, walking down the aisle through a sea of faces, pitying, judgmental, curious, all of them staring. Outside, the sky broke open. Rain fell hard, darkening her dress in spreading stains. Wind tore her veil loose, sent it twisting into the storm. On the church steps stood Rowan Beckett. No suit, no boutonniere, just a 19-year-old boy with a pale, stricken face. She stopped before him. Rain poured between them, drumming on the earth. "You weren't meant to find out like this," he said, voice shaking. "I was going to tell you, after the wedding." June's eyes met his, no longer angry, only hollow. "Why?" "Because I knew you'd never look at me the same," he whispered. "Not as a man, not as someone worthy. I just wanted a chance, a single chance to prove myself to you." His hand clenched tight. "I never meant to hurt you, June. Not once." She shook her head, rain mingling with tears. "But you did." And with that, she turned away. The crowd parted as she walked past, mud sucking at her shoes, her soaked skirt heavy with water. No one spoke, only the wind, the thunder, and the sound of her footsteps leaving the church. Slow, steady, unbroken. Rowan stood where she'd left him, drenched and trembling, as if the storm had stripped the world bare. On the ground, the gold ring lay half buried in a puddle, its glint fading, the last light swallowed by the darkening sky. For 3 days, June did not step outside her door. The small room behind the schoolhouse grew heavy with damp air and silence thick enough to choke on. The bouquets someone had sent lay wilted on the table, their petals curling inward, while her meals went untouched and cold. Outside, the town still buzzed like a wound that refused to heal. Whenever the wind carried faint voices to her window, she knew they were talking about her, the schoolteacher fooled by her own students' love letters. On Wednesday evening, the rain came. Thick drops struck the roof, sharp against the window panes, beating a rhythm that echoed her heart. June sat by the oil lamp when a knock sounded at the door. Soft at first, then harder. She hesitated. Then came the voice. Low, familiar. "June, it's me." Her chest tightened. She rose slowly, her hand gripping the latch. When she opened the door, Rowan Beckett stood there, soaked through, a woven basket in his arms. Rain whipped his back, wind tossing his wet hair into his eyes. "I brought some food," he said, his voice rough and raw. "My mother always said, when someone's hurting, you don't let them go hungry." June's eyes fell on the basket, the faint warmth of bread spilling into the cold air. "You should go," she said flatly. "I don't need anything." He nodded, but didn't move. The wind surged, lifting the curtain behind her. Lightning flashed white across his face, and a moment later thunder cracked, deep and violent. The rain came harder, pushing both of them against the doorway. Instinct made her grab his sleeve and pull him inside before the storm could swallow them both. They stood in the small room, their breath loud against the pounding roof. Rowan set the basket down, water running from his sleeves. "I'm not here to beg forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling. I just need you to know. I never meant to make you a joke to anyone. June folded her arms, forcing her voice to stay calm. And you expect me to believe that? After a dozen letters written under a false name. I did it because I didn't have another way, he said, his words breaking against the sound of rain. The first day I came to class, I knew you'd never really see me. I'm just a ranch hand, a boy with nothing but calloused hands. I wanted you to see me as a man, even if only through words. She turned her face away. And you thought deceit would make that happen? I thought, if you read the letters before knowing who I was, you might hear my heart. Not my name, not my age. He stepped closer, voice dropping. I love you, June. I love the way you read to the children, the way your voice softens when you teach, even the way you never smile at me. I only wanted a chance. She said nothing. The anger inside her loosened, replaced by something deeper, tangled, weary and unsteady. You made me a fool, she whispered, tears cutting down her cheeks. You made me doubt myself. Rowan bowed his head. I know. And if I could take that weight from you, I would. The storm grew louder, rattling the shutters. They stood only a few steps apart, close enough that one touch could undo everything. At last, June drew a breath, her voice shaking but clear. I need time. Go home, Rowan. He nodded slowly, regret flickering across his eyes. He reached for his hat. I'll wait, he said, however long it takes. He opened the door. The wind roared in, snuffing out the lamp's flame. His shadow vanished into the rain, then around the bend, swallowed by the storm. June stood in the dark, one hand gripping the edge of the table. The room was silent again, except for the endless rain and the hollow ache threading through her breath. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the storm's howl, she knew something within her had shifted. Quietly, dangerously, and no matter how hard she tried, she could no longer call it stillness. Rumors in Clearwater Springs traveled faster than the wind. By dawn, the entire town knew the story of the schoolteacher who was tricked into marriage by her student. From the general store to the dressmakers, from the Silver Dollar Saloon to the small church at the end of Main Street, everyone had their own version, each one stretched and twisted to make it more exciting. She must have been crazy to believe those letters. Or maybe she knew all along and played along. Poor thing. Or maybe she deserves it. Hard to tell which. Those words drifted through every window, clung to June like dust that no amount of brushing could remove. When she walked down the street, people looked. Some nodded politely. Others turned away. Even the children, the same ones she had taught to read, to sing, began to disappear from class. Their parents said it was harvest season, but June knew the truth behind their excuses. The mornings were quieter now. Her voice echoed through empty benches. The scratch of chalk on the board sounded hollow. Still, she taught. Word by word, lesson by lesson, as though routine itself could keep her heart from breaking. By noon, she would return to the little house behind the school. The air carried the scent of wet earth, and on her doorstep, she would often find a small basket of warm bread. Inside would be roasted potatoes, a strip of smoked meat, and a note scrawled in rough handwriting. Just 2 words. Eat this. She didn't need to guess who left it. There was never a name, never a knock. But she knew. Every few days, something else would appear outside her door. A bundle of firewood, a coil of new rope, a jar of honey, or fresh greens from someone's field. She never saw him bring them, but the boot prints in the mud always gave him away. That evening, the rain began again, thin, steady, relentless. June stood by the window, fingers lifting the curtain slightly. Through the blur of rain, she saw him, Rowan Beckett, standing by the fence. His shirt was soaked through, shoulders heavy, hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't call out. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, facing her house as if speaking with his eyes, words the storm could never carry. June held her breath. Part of her wanted to open the door, to say something, anything. But shame and hurt wrapped tight around her like wire. Her hands stayed still. Then he turned away. His figure blurred in the rain, his steps slow but unbroken. When he was gone, June stayed by the window. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. Not anger, but something softer. Something that made her press her palm to her heart, just to feel it still beating. That night, she sat by the window with the lamp burning low. Outside, wind whispered through the eaves. The rain tapped a steady rhythm on the roof. June thought about what he'd said that night of the storm. "I just wanted you to see me." For the first time, she wondered if beneath all those clumsy lies, there had been something real. Clumsy, boyish, unformed, but honest enough to keep him standing in the rain, watching over her from a distance. She blew out the lamp and stepped onto the porch. The rain was soft, cool against her skin. The air smelled of earth and pine. In that quiet moment, June Halston, once proud, once unshakable, felt something stir inside her. A fragile thread, trembling like a harp string touched by the wind. And she understood then. She hadn't forgiven him. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But somewhere deep within, her heart had begun to hear the sound of his footsteps again. After that day, Rowan sent no more letters, no explanations, no apologies, no promises. He simply worked, quietly, steadily, as if every small act of repair were a way to atone for what words could never mend. Each morning, when June opened her door, something had changed. A section of fence replaced, the leaky porch fixed, the steps no longer creaked. Even the old well, where she once strained to pull up heavy buckets, now had a new rope, smooth and strong. He never left a note. Only footprints in the dirt, leading back toward the Beckett Ranch. The town kept whispering for a while, but slowly, as people saw her lamp burning again at night, saw her return to the market, saw color return to her face, they stopped. Old stories faded, as all things did in Clearwater Springs. One morning late in summer, June opened her door and froze. Before her, on the patch of ground that had always been wild and bare, a row of purple flowers swayed gently in the wind. Wild asters, the same kind she had once mentioned in passing that spring. If anyone can grow these in Kansas dirt, I'd believe they have magic. She knelt down, fingertips brushing the petals. They were fragile, trembling, impossibly alive. In the distance, she heard hoofbeats. Rowan rode past, not stopping, but his eyes caught hers for a fleeting moment, as if waiting for something. That evening, June walked to the Beckett Ranch. When he saw her at the gate, he set down his hammer, his face caught between surprise and hope. "Would you like supper?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind. Dinner passed mostly in silence. Only the soft clink of forks, the crackle of firewood, the low hum of the storm far away. They didn't need many words. The space between them, once wide as a prairie, had quietly begun to close. When she reached to pour more water, their hands brushed. He didn't pull away. She didn't either. The lamplight glowed gold against their faces, fragile, peaceful, like something newly mended. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. "You didn't have to fix the porch, or mend the roof, or plant flowers." Rowan looked up. His gray eyes were steady, deep as rain-soaked soil. "You once said that if love was real, it should be proven every day." He paused, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "I'm just doing what you said." The words were simple, but they struck something inside her that had long been still. June looked at him for a long moment. All the anger, the hurt, the pride, like frost slowly melting in sunlight. At last she whispered, "If love is real, prove it every day." Rowan's voice was low, certain. "I already am." He reached out, hesitated for a breath, then took her hand. This time she didn't pull away. Their breathing filled the small room, slow, uneven, alive. It wasn't impulsive or reckless. It was something deeper. Two weary souls, finding each other again after much silence. He lifted a trembling hand, brushing her cheek. The warmth of his palm sent her pulse scattering. He leaned closer, lips meeting hers, tentative at first, then certain, like a truth long unspoken, but always known. The oil lamp flickered, light dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind quieted. There was only them, and the slow rhythm of two hearts finding their way back to each other. That night, they found peace not through vows, but through the quiet belief that love, when true, could heal what had once been broken. By morning, the sun rose early. The door stood half open, the warmth of sleep still clinging to the room. A thin blanket had fallen to the floor, and the breeze that slipped through the doorway carried the scent of wild asters, soft, enduring, and new, the kind of scent that lingers long after a storm has passed. The autumn morning spread golden light across the fields, warm as honey. June awoke to the sound of a knock and Rowan's voice calling from the porch. "Come with me. I've got something to show you." She opened the door, and sunlight poured in, carrying the scent of dry grass and dust. Rowan stood there, sleeves rolled up, his eyes bright with something unsaid. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see." They walked side by side toward the Beckett Ranch. The prairie stretched wide around them, the tall grass brushing her skirt as the wind whispered through it. The sun hung low, spilling over his shoulders, softening everything it touched. When they reached the stables, June stopped. The smell of leather, hay, and horse sweat filled the air. She blinked in surprise. "Why bring me here?" "To see Clementine again." She froze. In the corner stall stood a chestnut mare, head turning at the sound of her name. Her dark eyes shimmered under the sunlight. "The horse that Sterling sent?" June asked, her voice almost a whisper. Rowan nodded. "She's still yours. I just kept her for you." June stepped closer, her hand brushing the horse's warm neck. Clementine lowered her head, pressing gently into her palm, as if remembering. Something thick and wordless rose in June's chest. She thought of the letters, the gifts, the lies, and suddenly understood that somewhere beneath all of it, there had been something true. You once said you wanted to learn to ride for real, Rowan said quietly. Not like the ladies from town, proper and stiff. I could teach you. June smiled faintly. And if I fall? Then I'll catch you. He helped her into the saddle, his hands steady and careful at her waist. When Clementine began to move, the world tilted. Wind rushed against her face, her hair lifted, her heart racing with a thrill she hadn't felt in years. Keep the reins loose, Rowan said, walking beside her, his hand resting lightly near the horse's muzzle. Don't try to control her. Just trust. June did as he said. Clementine slowed, then found an even rhythm. June exhaled, a small, trembling smile crossing her lips. But then, without warning, the mare stopped short and turned. June let out a startled gasp, and before she could fall, Rowan's arms caught her, pulling her close. They steadied together, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath. The space between them vanished, replaced by the sound of two quickened hearts. June laughed softly, her voice shaky. Told you I'd fall. And I told you I'd catch you, he said, smiling back. A breeze passed through, brushing her hair across his cheek. For a moment, the world held still, the words they hadn't said alive in the quiet between them. No apologies, no promises, only trust. They kept practicing. June mounted again, this time sitting taller, more certain. Rowan guided her with patient hands, gentle words. Each time, she got it right. He smiled, calm, proud, without saying a thing. By late afternoon, the sun had spilled gold over the prairie. They rode together across the open field, wind rushing past, the sound of hooves blending with the low hum of the earth. June laughed, free, bright, unguarded. The sound carried through the grass, and Rowan lifted his head, listening as if it were the rarest music he'd ever heard. As the sun began to sink, they stopped on a small rise overlooking the town below, now glowing in amber light. Rowan reached to adjust her reins, his hand resting briefly over hers. So, she asked, half teasing, half shy, do you think I've learned enough? He looked at her for a long time, the last light of day reflected in his gray eyes. Then he said softly, now you're starting to see the world the way I see you. June said nothing. She looked out toward the horizon, where the sun melted into the land, where the air smelled of grass, earth, and quiet joy. Clementine pawed the ground gently and gave a low, contented whinny, as if in agreement. And beneath the fading light, June Halston knew she no longer saw him as a student, nor as the boy who once lied to her, but as the man she had finally learned to trust. That morning, June Halston packed the few things she owned, a handful of books, her ink pen, the headscarf she wore in the fields. No one came to see her off. No one asked where she was going. She walked quietly down the dirt road leading south until the white fence of the Beckett Ranch appeared through the pale morning fog. Rowan was out in the yard, chopping wood. When he looked up and saw her standing there with a small suitcase in hand, the axe slipped from his grasp. His eyes widened in disbelief. I didn't come to ask for anything, she said, before he could speak, her voice calm and even. I just came to live a new life. He said nothing, only nodded once, and in that single gesture was a quiet kind of gratitude. From that day on, June Halston moved into the Beckett Ranch. The town began to whisper again. She really moved in? No wedding? Just living together? Lord, what kind of school teacher does that? But June no longer cared. The storm had passed, and she was no longer afraid of thunder. The first days felt strange. She woke early, lit the stove, brewed coffee, while Rowan led the horses out to graze. They spoke little, exchanging only short glances through the morning mist. Sometimes when she washed dishes, he'd pass by, hands still rough and smelling of earth, and set a bundle of wildflowers on the table. No words, no reason, just presence. By noon, they worked side by side in the yard, she planting vegetables, he mending the fence. Sometimes their hands brushed as they lifted the water barrel. "I've got it," he'd say. "I can manage," she'd reply. But he would still hold her hand a moment longer, not to help, just to keep it there. Soon, everything began to settle into rhythm. She was no longer a guest. He no longer needed excuses to stay close. They shared small things, a ladle, a blanket, a quiet laugh. One afternoon, after a light rain, they sat on the porch watching the fields shimmer under the sun. "Tomorrow I'll plow the east field," Rowan said. "And I'll plant beans beside the purple flowers," she answered. He smiled. "You sound like this place is already yours." June looked around. The porch, the well, the soft curl of smoke from the chimney. Then she said quietly, "Maybe it is." That night, they ate by lamplight. No music, no talk. Only the sound of wind through the window and the smell of bread still warm from the oven. Later, when the wind picked up, June stood to bring in the blankets from the porch. Rowan reached out, stopping her with a hand on her shoulder. "Leave them," he said. "The wind's too strong." She turned to answer, but his hand stayed where it was, steady, warm. She didn't move away. In the long hush that followed, the light from the lamp fell across their faces, so close their breath mingled. He said her name softly. "June." Just one word, but it sounded like a prayer. She didn't reply, she didn't need to. When he leaned in and their lips met, there was no storm, no rush, only breath, slow and deep, as certain as the heartbeat of the earth itself. That night, they slept together, not out of impulse, but in the quiet decision of two people who had already chosen each other. No vows were spoken, no promises made, only heartbeats, the rhythm of breathing, and the faint scent of skin and wind entwined in the dark. Outside, the night turned cold. Inside, the small lamp still burned. A hand reached out in the dark, found another, and held tight. And across the wide Kansas prairie, where once there had been gossip and judgment, there was now only one small house, and two people at peace, bound not by words but by belonging. The next morning, June woke early. She stepped out onto the porch. Dew glistened on the grass. Behind her, Rowan still slept, a soft smile resting on his lips. She turned toward the fields where the sun was rising, warm, golden, full of promise. And for the first time she whispered, almost to herself, "At last, I'm home." Time passed quietly, like the Kansas wind, never announcing its coming, yet changing everything in its path. One late winter morning, the first cry echoed through their small wooden house, soft, fragile, yet brimming with life. Rowan held the newborn in his trembling arms, as though he had just touched something sacred. June, her hair damp with sweat, smiled faintly. "He has your eyes," she whispered. Rowan looked down at the baby, then at her. No, he said softly. He has your heart. And so there was one child, then two. In the years that followed, the Beckett home filled with laughter and the scent of baking bread. June still taught school, still wore her simple dresses and the green scarf tied at her neck. But now, though, the children called her by two names: teacher at school, mama at home. As for Rowan, he was no longer the clumsy boy who once tripped over his own words. The Beckett Ranch grew into one of the finest horse farms in the region. Strong, well-trained horses were bred and sold to neighboring states. People came to buy, to learn, and always left with a quiet respect for the man once mocked by an entire town. Clearwater Springs changed too. Folks still told the story of the old scandal, but their tone had softened. The teacher and the boy, they said, turned what was shameful into something worth admiring. Life unfolded in small, tender moments. One morning, as June sifted flour, Rowan came in from the barn and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Careful, the flour," she began, but it was too late. The bowl tipped, dusting them both white. They stared at each other, then burst into laughter, the sound spilling through the kitchen like sunlight. That afternoon, their two children chased the old dog, Barkley, across the yard. Rowan tossed his coat aside and joined them, pretending to lose, making the children squeal with delight. June stood on the porch, wiping flour from her skirt, watching them, her heart softening until it nearly ached. "Don't you worry they'll ruin the garden?" she teased when he came back inside. "The garden can be replanted," he said, grinning as he wiped his brow. "But that laughter? You don't get it back once it's gone." Summer nights found them sitting together on the porch, a lantern swinging overhead. Rowan talked about the new horses. June listened, her fingers loosely laced with his. Sometimes, one of the children woke crying, and she would hold them close, humming the lullabies she once taught her students long ago. Each season brought new things to plant, new fences to mend, new flowers to bloom. Along the white fence line, the wild asters still grew, the same purple blossoms he had planted years before. They stood proud beneath the sun, a quiet reminder that truth, even late, can still take root and thrive. One evening, Rowan sat on the steps with both children in his arms, the older one giggling as he pretended to fall, the younger clutching his shirt and squealing with joy. June watched from beside him, her eyes bright, her smile soft. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been if you hadn't written those letters?" she asked. Rowan looked at her, his gaze gentle. "I'd probably still be some rough ranch hand, too afraid to dream of someone like you." She smiled. "And I'd still be a lonely school teacher, believing in letters that never came from anyone real." The wind stirred then, carrying the scent of hay and wildflowers. The four of them sat there quietly, a perfect stillness resting between heartbeats. Beyond the fields, the sun sank low, painting everything in gold. The children ran ahead, chasing each other through the grass, their laughter ringing across the open land. June leaned her head on Rowan's shoulder. He reached over, twining his fingers through hers. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Every promise had already been kept, not with paper or rings, but through the years they had built together, steady and true. On the Beckett porch, bathed in the glow of sunset, they sat side by side, watching their children run across the fields, and knew that happiness was never something spoken of aloud. It was something quietly made, day, by two people who never stopped believing in what could grow after the storm. Summer nights in Clearwater Springs had grown softer with the years. The wind no longer tore across the plains as it once did. It only brushed past the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of dry hay and the song of crickets hidden in the dark. The Beckett house still stood on the same old rise, its porch faded by sun and time. Yet the warm glow from within spilled gently through the windows, casting a stillness over the land, as if even the night had paused to listen. June sat in her old wicker chair, a thin blanket over her knees. Silver strands shimmered in her dark hair under the lamplight, glinting like threads of moonlight. Beside her, Rowan sat quietly, his frame still broad, though his shoulders now bowed under the weight of the years. On the table between them, 2 cups of mint tea let off small curls of steam, the same scent she had loved since she was young. Outside, the fields had turned a deep gold. Their horses had grown old too, slow-moving, gentle creatures that grazed beneath the pale moonlight. The house was peaceful now. Their children were grown, with families of their own. They came to visit sometimes, bringing laughter and noise that made the kitchen young again. But tonight, it was just the 2 of them, 2 quiet souls after a lifetime of wind. Rowan turned to her, his voice low, roughened by age. "June, do you ever regret it?" She looked at him, that familiar smile softening her face, the same one that had undone him for decades. "Regret?" she repeated, her eyes distant. "Yes," she said finally, and paused long enough for the wind to pass between her words. "But only the days before I knew who you really were." He chuckled, the sound husky but warm. His hand rested open on the table, waiting. June looked at those hands, the same ones that had once spilled ink as a nervous boy, the ones that had lifted her from a storm and held her steady ever since. She placed her hand over his, light but certain. Silence settled around them like a thin blanket. Neither spoke. They simply listened, to the whisper of wind through grass, to the soft creak of the old porch, to time breathing gently between them. Above, a thin cloud drifted across the moon, spreading a pale, tender light over everything. June tilted her head. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The wind," she said, smiling faintly. "It still goes, and it still comes back, like everything we once lost." He nodded. "Like us." A moment later, she whispered, her voice barely above the night breeze. "If you hadn't written those letters, I might never have known what it felt like to be loved that way, to be seen not as a teacher, but as a woman." Rowan's hand tightened around hers. "And if you hadn't forgiven me, I might have lived my whole life afraid of who I was." They both laughed softly. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint sound of a horse's bell somewhere far off. The prairie seemed to, hold its breath, watching them. The 2 people it had once tested, now resting in the calm it had finally granted them. June leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "some lies are born from love, and some truths, even when they come late, can still build a home." Rowan said nothing, only nodded, his arm drawing her closer. Together, they sat and listened to the wind pass until it faded into the quiet night. In the distance, the moonlight poured over the fields where wild asters still bloomed, stubborn and beautiful, like the love they had sown all their lives. And there they remained, hand in hand, like two old trees that had finally found the ground strong enough to hold them after every storm. Some stories need no heroes, no grand endings, just two ordinary people who outlasted the rumors, the loneliness, and the noise, and still chose to stay when the wind grew gentle. June and Rowan hadn't begun with grace. They began with a lie, one that turned the town against them. But from that broken start, they learned that real love is not made of promises. It's built from patience, kindness, and the quiet proof of showing up every day. Their story, once a scandal, had become a legacy. A reminder that life is not measured by the years we live, but by how deeply we love in the smallest moments. A bowl of soup warmed again, a door mended without a word, a hand that doesn't pull away when the other trembles. If you've ever loved too late, been misunderstood, or had to start over when someone turned away, then you'll understand why June never regretted a thing. Because in the end, what remains isn't youth or perfection, but the one who stays beside you when there's nothing left to prove. On the Beckett porch, surrounded by golden fields, they didn't speak of the past or plan the future. There was only the wind, the scent of hay, and a small shared laugh between two cups of tea. All the storms were long gone now, leaving behind only softness, warm as an old blanket, steady as a hand that never let go. Maybe love never really leaves us. It just waits for those patient enough to stay and kind enough to see that even a clumsy lie can sometimes mean, I love you. If you're watching this on a quiet evening, take a moment to remember who's still beside you after all the seasons have changed. Because that person, that's home. Thank you for joining us for Where the Wind Ends, a story of forgiveness, of growing older, and of love that no longer needs to prove itself. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment to share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you can sit with us again someday and hear more Wild West love stories like this one. Stories of love, time, and wind, still blowing softly, as if it never left at all.